المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة لذكري صدق الله العظيم. وقال الله تبارك وتعالى في شان حبيب الكريم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم صلاة وسلام عليك سيدي يا رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليك وسلم. After praising Allah, the most glorified, the most supreme, the controller of all affairs, the one without whom we will not be gathered here today. And after sending countless peace, blessings and salutations upon the best of creation, the Noor of the universe, the jewel of mankind, the coolness to our hearts and eyes, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I'd like to extend my greetings to those who are gathered here today by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is only through the fadl, through the karam, through the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are gathered here today on now what is the fourth program that we have. And following suit from the previous three programs, inshallah today's topic is on Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He is the second greatest man to have walked this earth after Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq and the Anbiya Kiram. And this is seen in all the hadith we find. Many hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given the bad tidings to Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, saying that he is one of the greatest people that the sun has ever shone upon. This is from the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, his rank is so supreme that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself says that if there was to be a prophet after me, if there was to be a prophet after me, then that would be Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu. We all know the Aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah is that there is no prophet after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There can never be any prophet after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It confirmed in the Quran as well. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Khatam al-Nabi, is the final prophet, final messenger. There can be no messenger after him. This is why he says, if there can be a prophet. Meaning he is confirmed that there cannot be a prophet after me. But if there could be, this prophet would be Sayyidina Umar. Imagine how high his rank is in the eyes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was led to say this about Sayyidina Umar. That if there was to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. In another hadith he says about Umar, that whoever hates Umar, whoever detests Umar, whoever has books, hatred against Umar, then he has hatred against me. And whoever loves Umar, he has love with me. This is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says about Sayyidina Umar, the second Khalifa of Islam. That whoever hates Umar hates me, and whoever loves Umar loves me. So a true sign of Iman, a true sign that you love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that you love Umar. There are people today who say la'nat upon Umar, astaghfirullah al-azim, they say la'nat upon him. Those people, they should take heed from this hadith sharif. If you say la'nat upon Sayyidina Umar, then what are you saying about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What are you actually sending upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? If you have so much love for Umar, then why don't you show the same amount of love for Umar as well? Because if you love somebody, you should love who they love as well. It's a common thing. If you love somebody, you should love who they love as well. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loves Sayyidina Umar, so we should also love him as well. He's the second Khalifa of Islam. All the Sahaba, they agreed upon this as well. The Sahaba, they didn't say, why is Umar the Khalifa? They didn't disagree with it. They all agreed. They all gave bay'ah, they all signed the paper as well, that Sayyidina Umar will be the next Khalifa after Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. Now we begin with Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, after explaining his khas rank, his high rank in the court of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His story of accepting Islam, very famous story. And for the benefit of the congregation, we'll go through the story again. We see Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, he accepted Islam in Makkah Mukarramah. But during his time, and especially during the time of Makkah Mukarramah, there were very few Muslims. And those people who had accepted Islam, they kept the Iman quiet. They didn't tell anybody we were Muslims. They didn't perform Salah openly. They performed everything very privately, very quietly. And Islam was only limited to about 40 individuals, men and women, 40. Some say 53 altogether, including the women. So Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, he had a meeting with the Quraysh. At this point he was not Muslim. They had a meeting and they were thinking, how are we going to destroy Islam? How are we going to destroy Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? They had a few discussions, they had a few ideas, and one person spoke out saying, we should assassinate Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They should assassinate him. Now the whole congregation, the Quraysh, they meet and they stay quiet. Nobody could say anything. Because they knew if somebody was to attack Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then all the Banu Hashim, the Banu Zahra would be upon him. So everybody stayed quiet. They didn't want this to happen to them. And then Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he stood up and he said, I'll do it. And even before he accepted Islam, he was one of the most courageous people the Quraysh had known. And not just the Quraysh, but the whole of Arabia. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was one of the most courageous people to have ever been known. One of the most courageous, one of the most brave, one of the most strongest. This is Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. So even before he accepted Islam, he said, I will do it. So he left the meeting, and during midday, in Arabia, midday is very, very hot. For those who have been, I'm sure you've experienced that midday heat. So generally during midday, people stay inside their homes. They close their shops, they stay inside their home, they don't do anything at this time. But Sayyidina Umar, at this time he left his home, and he went towards to Rasulullah, he marched towards his house, sword in hand. And on the way, on the path, he met a Sahabi, Sayyidina Nu'aym, radiallahu anhu. Now Sayyidina Nu'aym, some historians, they say it was somebody else, but most historians agree that it was Sayyidina Nu'aym, radiallahu anhu. And remember, Sayyidina Nu'aym, he kept his iman quiet. Nobody knew that he was Muslim. Sayyidina Umar did not know that he was Muslim. So Sayyidina Nu'aym, he says, oh Umar, in this midday heat, where are you going holding your sword in your hand? And then Sayyidina Umar, he replied by saying, I'm going to assassinate Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, I'm going to assassinate him. And Sayyidina Nu'aym, he says that firstly, you should think about your own household first. Your own brother-in-law and your own sister have accepted Islam. Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha, now this Sayyidah Fatima was the sister of Sayyidina Umar, not the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sayyidah Fatima bint al-Khattab, the sister of Sayyidina Umar. She was the sister of Sayyidina Umar, and her husband was Sayyidina Sa'id bin Zayd radiallahu anhu. So they had accepted Islam, and Sayyidina Nu'aym told Sayyidina Umar, first you should go check your own household first. You check who your household is. But before he even said this, they were in a lock. They both had swords raised against each other. Because Sayyidina Nu'aym said to Sayyidina Umar, oh Umar, if you were to attack Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Banu Hashim and the Banu Zahra will be upon you. They'll come to attack you. And Sayyidina Umar became enraged. He pulled out his sword. Sayyidina Nu'aym pulled out his sword as well. They both began to have a clash. And this is when he told him that first you check your own household. Check your own household, check your own sister, check your own brother-in-law. They've accepted Islam. They've forsaken your religion of your forefathers. And they've accepted Islam. Go check on them first before you go to anybody else. And this is where the common thing comes that first check your own household. Check your own home. Check what happens in your own home first before you try checking everybody else. People come and say you should do this. But you go into your own household, it's completely the opposite of what they're saying. From this alone we can learn first always check the situation of your own household first before you go reform anybody else. So Sayyidina Umar, he marched towards his sister's home, or his brother-in-law's home. He marched towards his house and he began knocking on a door very heavily. He began to shout from outside, open this door right now. Inside the house were three companions. The sister of Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidah Fatima, the brother-in-law, Sayyidina Sa'id bin Zayd, and their teacher, Sayyidina Khabbab radiallahu anhu. Sayyidina Khabbab was teaching them the Quran, and when he heard Sayyidina Umar at the door, he ran to the back of the house and he hid over there. And then Sayyidah Fatima, she opened the door and she allowed Sayyidina Umar to come in. The moment he came in and he saw his brother-in-law, he jumped on his wrist, he grappled him, threw him onto the floor and began to punch his face. And he began to send a flurry of attacks on his face, to the extent that his face began to bleed uncontrollably. The face of Sayyidina Sa'id bin Zayd radiallahu anhu began to bleed uncontrollably, and Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha, the sister of Sayyidina Umar, she began to say, oh Umar, what are you doing? And she got in the way and she also got hit in the face. And her blessed face began to bleed. Her nose was bleeding. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he saw this, but he still carried on. He was in a state of jalal. He was in a state of anger, for example. And he carried on attacking, and then Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha, bleeding from her face. But remember, she's the brother of Sayyidina Umar. She had that Faruqi blood in her. So she wasn't afraid. She was still, brave in this situation. And she said to Umar, oh Umar, you can extract every single blood from our body. You can take every single blood from our body, but we will never leave Islam. We will always confirm that Allah is one and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His messenger. You can take whatever you can from us. Whatever you do, whatever you want. But we'll never leave Islam. We'll never come back to the old religion. We'll always stay with Islam. And Sayyidina Umar, after hearing this, he came back into his senses. He stood up and he said to his sister, what were you reciting? What were you reciting before? And so she brought out the pieces or the sheets of the Quran and they recited Surah Taha. Other narrations mention that they recited another surah, but the historians agree mostly that it was Surah Taha that they recited. And she made him do wudu, she made him clean himself, and then he picked up the piece of the Quran and he began to recite Surah Taha. And then he kept reading. We got to verse 17, the verse I recited at the beginning. So verse 14, Innani ana Allah, that indeed I am Allah. This is what Allah is in the Quran. The ayah that Sayyidina Umar read, Innani ana Allah, la ilaha illa ana. Indeed I am Allah, verily I am Allah. There is no God to be worshipped except me. Fa'budni, so worship me. This is what Allah says, and waqim as-salat li dhikri. And so I stand for prayers for my remembrance. When Sayyidina Umar heard this, he said, take me to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, take me to him. And Sayyidina Khabbab, he came out from hiding and he said to Umar, oh Umar, glad tidings to you. Glad tidings to you. Why? Because the night before, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was making the dua that, oh Allah, strengthen Islam through either Abu Jahl or through Umar. So the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was accepted. That Sayyidina Umar was going to accept Islam. So Sayyidina Khabbab gave him the glad tidings. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allahumma a'izz al-Islam bil Umar. That, oh Allah, strengthen Islam, honor Islam with Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and his dua was accepted. And this is where Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at this time, he was staying at the house of another Sahabi, Sayyidina Arqam radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And when he went to his house, Sayyidina Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he had only accepted Islam about a day before this, or 3 days before this. He was at the door, he was guarding the door. Sayyidina Hamza and Sayyidina Talha radiyallahu anhuma, they were guarding the door, and the other Sahaba Ikram, they were inside the house. And when Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu knocked on the door, he had his sword in his hand. So the Sahaba inside, they were fearfully saying, oh, Umar has come to attack us. They didn't know that he'd accepted Islam at this point. And Sayyidina Hamza, remember Sayyidina Hamza, the lion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says to the Sahaba Kiram that don't worry, I'm here. Don't worry, don't fear from Umar because I am here. If he comes with good intentions, then good. But if he comes to do anything, then I will kill him with his own sword. Sayyidina Amir Hamza radiallahu anhu, he said this. So they allowed Sayyidina Umar to come inside. And he met with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, how long are you going to wait? And then instantly Sayyidina Umar fell down, kissed his hands and feet, and accepted Shahada, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika la, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He accepted Islam from this point. And he, you know, after the moment he accepted Islam, all the Sahaba, they began to recite takbir. It's Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And they began to shout the takbir so much so that the surrounding vicinity could hear. The Sahaba would say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. This is how excited they were. How joyful they were that Sayyidina Umar had accepted Islam. And they knew that from this point onwards, Islam had been strengthened. Islam had been honored. Because Sayyidina Umar was such a powerful individual that even the kuffar were afraid of him. Everybody was afraid of him. They knew that he was not to be someone that you can mess with. You couldn't mess with Sayyidina Umar. So they were all excited, they were all very happy, they were joyful. And continuing on from this, he went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why do we perform everything privately? Why do we do everything quietly? Why don't we go publicly? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him that it is for the betterment of Islam at the moment that we do everything quietly, that we stay private, we don't publicize everything. But Sayyidina Umar said, oh Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I am here now. I have become Muslim now. I am now your servant. Nobody can touch you anymore. And he marched in 2 lines. It's how they marched in 2 lines. One line was led by Sayyidina Umar, the other line was led by Sayyidina Amir Hamza. And they both marched together towards Masjid al-Haram. And they stood in front of the Kaaba and they began to worship publicly in front of the Kaaba. And all the Quraysh, they watched but they couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything. It's when Abu Jahl himself, he witnessed this but he couldn't do anything. So that Sayyidina Amir Hamza is there and Sayyidina Umar is there. We can't do anything at this point. And later on, a few years later, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he wanted to proclaim publicly to everybody that I am now Muslim. So he began knocking on the doors of each member of the Quraysh. He knocked on the door of Abu Jahl. and the door didn't open. He knocked again. And this time he heard the lock, meaning the door became locked now. And he heard a voice from inside saying, never do this again. And Sayyidina Umar was confused. He said, what's going on? Why are they not letting me inside? Abu Jahl was his uncle. Abu Jahl was the uncle of Sayyidina Umar. So he's confused, why is my uncle not letting me inside? So he went to another house of another influential member, of another high-ranking member of society. He went to their house, knocked in their house. Door was locked. And he heard the same thing from inside, never do this again. So he's very confused, what's going on? Because obviously these people know that he's Sayyidina Umar outside. If we did it today, we'd be slaughtered. So they were very afraid. They locked the door and just kept inside their house. So he said, Umar, he went to somebody somebody who publicly announced things. So the people go to him, they say this has happened, and that person will announce to the public that this has happened. So he went to this person, he said to him, tell everybody that I've accepted Islam. Announce it to the public that I've accepted Islam. So he announced to everybody, Sayyidina Umar has accepted Islam. And he announced to everybody. And then the people, when they heard this, they gathered in a huge mob and they began to attack Sayyidina Umar. And he began to fight back. And Sayyidina Umar, he wouldn't let something like this go, he began to fight back as well. And Abu Jahl, hearing all this commotion, he came out and he said, everybody leave this man alone, he's my nephew, he's now under my protection. But then Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, he knew that the Sahaba were being prosecuted. A lot of the Sahaba they were being attacked, they were being tortured. So he thought, why is this not happening to me? Why are they not attacking me as well? And when Abu Jahl took him under his protection, Sayyidina Umar said to Abu Jahl, oh Abu Jahl, listen, I do not need your protection. Take your protection back with you. And Abu Jahl left. And Sayyidina Umar from that point onwards, he was still attacked by the Quraysh, but he wasn't attacked as much as the other Sahaba Kiram. They were still afraid of Sayyidina Umar. They attacked him every now and then when there were a huge group of them. But individually, nobody was attacking. And there's proof of this as well. That on the migration, when the Sahaba Kiram migrate from Makkah to Mukarramah to Madinah to Munawwara, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he was one that later wants to leave. He grabbed his sword, he grabbed his bow and arrow, he grabbed his arrows as well. He began to tawaf the Kaaba, openly, with his sword in hand and the bow and arrow in his other hand. Openly doing tawaf, and Abu Jahl and the other Quraysh, they would witness this. There were lots of them looking at him, but they couldn't do anything. And then he prayed 2 rakat nafil at Maqam Ibrahim, and then he announced to the people, he said, shame be upon every single one of you. Shame upon all of you. Because they're not accepting Islam at this point. And they had driven Rasulullah out in his own town. So he said, shame upon all of you. If any of you want to fight me, I'm going to be in this valley, come and meet me. And he left. He said, come and meet me over there. And he left, and he went to that place. Nobody came. Not a single member of the Quraysh came to meet Sayyidina Umar. They were all afraid of him. And afterwards he left Makkah to Mukarramah and he went to Madinah to Munawwara. And this was the migration. Before he left, he announced to the people. They were all scared of him. Nobody dared to go next to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. This was his bravery, his courage. When we talk about Sayyidina Umar, bravery and courage is one thing. But another thing which is very, very important about his lifetime was his khilafah. He ruled for roughly 10 years and 5 or 6 months. And during his khilafah, he was such a just and such a noble leader of Islam that till today, whenever we give the khutbah on Jum'ah, we say, وَعَلَىٰ أَعْدِلِ الْأَصْحَابِ, upon the most just of the companions, Amir al-Mu'mineen Abi Hafs Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, upon the leader of the Mu'mineen Abi Hafs Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. This is what we say in the khutbah, وَعَادَ الْأَصْحَابِ, the most just of companions. This was Sayyidina Umar. So whenever we talk about his justice, we can look at this especially through his lifetime as the Khalifa. During his Khilafat, firstly, when they announced his Khilafat and they began to decide his wages, the Sahaba Ikram, they began to have meetings about his wages. They said that they give him a very lofty wage. He's the Amir al-Mu'mineen after all, the leader of the Muslims. We have to give him a very lofty wage. And they were discussing, and Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he said that we should give him enough that he can just feed himself and his family. That's all we need to give him. And this comes from the public treasury, the public funds, it comes from there. And Sayyidina Umar, when he heard this, he said, I agree with Sayyidina Ali. And he took only what was needed for him, and the rest was given to the public, was in the public funds. And whenever somebody suggested that we should raise his wages, we should give him more, he became very angry. And he got to the point where he said that I will slaughter the person who says this ever again. So nobody ever suggested ever again that he should be given higher wages. This was Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. His khilafah was so immense that Islam expanded vastly. I think 2 million square foot, or 2 million square feet, or 2 million square kilometers. My mind's gone blank, but something along these lines, 2 million, okay? That he had this much land. And he ensured that every single one of his people were kept safe, who had food in their homes and had money in their houses as well. In fact, during the night of his khilafat, he would leave his house wearing a cloak, wearing a hood. So he'd go in the disguise and he'd walk the streets of Madinah Munawwara. And he'd go to homes and he'd check, is this person safe? Does he have enough food for his family? Does he have enough money for tomorrow? Does he have enough heat in his home? Is he safe in his home? He'd go to many, many houses, and there'd be many, many situations where he would sit in the house of that person. They wouldn't know that it was Sayyidina Umar, and they would say, Sayyidina Umar has done this to me, Umar has done this to me, Umar has not given me enough. He was undercover, and a lady would be saying this, Umar has done this to me. And Sayyidina Umar, he began to weep, began to cry. He said, how can somebody under my rule, how can this be happening to them? So the next day he went home, he gathered some wealth from the treasury and he gave it to that person. After hearing this, and then he said to the lady, oh lady, I was in Umar, I was in your house last night. She didn't know this. She sought refuge, she sought for forgiveness, and then she accepted whatever she was given. And this happened many times to many other individuals. That Sayyidina Umar would walk the nights. Today, do we have any leaders? Do we have any kings, any rulers that will come onto the streets and look after us? Not a single ruler in the entire world would do this. Nobody would do this today. But Sayyidina Umar, he was so just. He was so, he knew the responsibility that was put upon him. That every night he would go out and look after citizens. During the day he would solve their problems. And during the night he would physically go out to see what is going on. Today, Boris Johnson, whoever's coming out new, they won't do this to us. All they care about is money. All they care about is their pockets. All they care about is their power. That's it. Boris Johnson doesn't care about us. Doesn't care about you and me. But Sayyidina Umar, every single person that was under his rule, even the animals, they will be looked after under his rule. Even the animals. We don't have this today. Yet they still seek assistance from Sayyidina Umar. The laws that he brought in, the regulation that he brought in, the social benefits that he brought in, they still accept today. The benefit system that we have today is from Sayyidina Umar. Sayyidina Umar, he invented this, or rather he brought this into play. That the benefits that we have today, whether for disabilities, whether for social benefit, whatever it is, these benefit systems brought by Sayyidina Umar. And the West today, they accept this, they say this is something that we invented. Whereas in reality it was Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, he took taxes from the people and he distributed the money amongst those who needed it most. This was the benefit of Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu. Another story of Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, is that when during his khilafat, there used to be the Roman Empire, and there was the Persian Empire as well. There were many empires during this time. The Roman Empire was very, very powerful. It had a vast land, a lot of land, a lot of occupied land. And the Roman Empire, the king, or rather one of the advisors of the king, he witnessed that my king, he's always got insomnia, he can't sleep. He's always got problems, digestion problems, mind problems. He's always stressing about his nation. So the king told his advisor that go to the Muslim Empire, see what their king is like, see what he is like. And so the advisor, he left the Roman Empire and he went towards Leyton Muharram, and he went with a huge procession as well. And when they entered Leyton Muharram, they asked the people around, where is your leader? They would say, he's in so-and-so place. Where is your leader? He's in so-and-so place. Where is your leader? He's in so-and-so place. And they keep asking this throughout the city, and eventually they reach Masjid al-Nabawi. And next to Masjid al-Nabawi, there'd be a bit of open land. And he saw that there was a man there in this open land. He was lying down on the floor. And on this floor, he had a small rock, and he placed this on his head, meaning underneath his head, and he lied down on the rock. And there'd be no one else around him. He'd be by himself. And the advisor asked, who is this man? And somebody gave the reply that this is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is Sayyidina Umar. radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, you must be joking. How can your king, how can your leader be lying like this with a rock as his pillow? You're joking with me. And the person said, no. This is Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The advisor was in tears. He began to cry. There is no security around him. He's not got any bed. His bed is the floor. His pillow is a rock. No security. He's sat there around say, bilkul, complete peace, tranquility. You know, he's having the best sleep of his life. And he thinks about his empire, his emperor. His emperor can't even sleep at night. He's got 24/7 security around him. Make sure nobody can walk in, nobody can walk out without permission. He's got this many medicines that he has to take every night. Mind problems, digestion problems, this problem, that problem. And that's the leader of the Roman Empire. And the leader of the Muslim Empire, complete at peace here. The leaders of today as well, same situation. Buckingham Palace, Downing Street, White House, 24/7 security. They sleep, but they can barely sleep at night. And we all, it's public knowledge as well. Commonly everyone knows this, that those who are in charge today, they do have some mental issues. They do have issues in their head. Whether they say publicly or not, as the public we can tell that we've got Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I'm sure everybody understands that he's got something going on, right? So we understand this is today's situation. But Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the leader of the Muslim Empire, he has so much stress on him, but yet he knew that he was at peace, because he knew that he was fulfilling the commands of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He knew that he was fulfilling the Quran and Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is why he was at peace. He knew that he was not going against Allah and His Rasul. He knew that he was only following Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is why he was at so much peace. He had tranquility in his life. There were things that were going on in Islam at that time. There were rebellions, this happening, that happening. Yet he would still be at peace in his sleep. He would not have the problems that the Roman Empire would have. He would not have the problems that today's leadership have today as well. This was Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. There's another hadith sharif where Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, the daughter of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, she asked, one day she was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there was open night. The sky was open, the stars, you could see the stars. Many, many stars in the sky. And she asked Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is there any Sahabi right now who has more deeds than there are stars in the sky? Is anybody who has more deeds, good deeds, than there are stars in the sky? And Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha, being the daughter of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, she expected the answer to be Sayyidina Abu Bakr. She expected Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say, it is Abu Bakr. But instead, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, his good deeds are more than the number of stars in the sky. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha, visibly you could see that she wasn't content, she wasn't happy with the answer. She was slightly upset about this. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he noticed this. He said, oh Aisha, speak. Oh Aisha, what's going on? Tell me. And Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha said, I was expecting you to say my father. I was expecting you to say that Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq has more good deeds. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that, oh Aisha, listen very carefully. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, if you put all of good deeds of Sayyidina Umar on one side, all of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu's good deeds on one side, and you put one moment of Abu Bakr Siddiq in the cave with me on the other side, that moment is greater than all of Sayyidina Umar's deeds. This is the rank of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq and then the rank of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu ajma'een. And look at the difference between their levels. Yet still, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq is the most afdal out of all the Sahaba Kiram, and then Sayyidina Umar. This is the rank. The Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he had more deeds, good deeds than the stars in the sky. And so many ahadith we'll find in the narration of Rasulullah in benefit and in the rank of Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq radiallahu anhu. He was very, very just in his life. Especially in his khilaf, he's very, very just. There was two tribes in Leyton Muharram. Before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, there were two tribes. And these two tribes, most of them accepted Islam, but some left. And when they left, they went to a place near Jerusalem. And they began to create their own empire. And the king was one of the members of the tribe. This king, he made good relations with the Roman Empire. And eventually their relationship grew, and this was during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And during that time, a Sahabi came from Madinah al-Munawwara and gave a message and said, and this is a message from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, accept Islam. It was a lengthy message, that briefly he saying, accept Islam. Otherwise, your kingdom will be destroyed. If you accept Islam, your kingdom will remain safe. And then, when he heard the second part, that if you do not accept Islam, your kingdom will be destroyed, he became angry, very, very angry. And he vowed that we are going to destroy Madinah al-Munawwara, we are going to destroy Islam. And that message came back to Madinah al-Munawwara. The people, they lived in fear of that empire for a while. They knew it was backed by the Roman Empire. And eventually, many, many years later, you fast forward to see the time of Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu. Nothing had happened between that time and now. And during this time, the new king, he was also from that initial tribe from Madinah al-Munawwara. He knew that a lot of his tribe men had accepted Islam. And he had this thing in his heart that I want to accept Islam now. They were Christians, some said that they were Jews, but the common narration that they were Christians. And they had in their heart that I want to accept Islam. And so he marched with an army of 300 people to Madinah al-Munawwara. And then when they reached Madinah al-Munawwara, they had some of the best clothing. They had red silk gowns, and they dressed their horses in silk. And Sayyidina Umar told his people, "Oh people, make them welcoming them into Madinah al-Munawwara." And they had festivals. They had they were enjoying themselves with this new king that come to Islam. They were thinking that, look, a king is about to join Islam. So the Sahaba Karam, the people of Madinah al-Munawwara, they were very excited. They were happy that now a king is about to join Islam. So they were enjoying themselves, they were very happy, their food was presented. And then Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, he took the king to Makkah al-Mukarramah. It was Hajj time. And Sayyidina Umar, his yearly thing was that he'd go Hajj every single year. So he took the king towards Hajj. And they began to perform tawaf of the Kaaba. And the king, he stepped on the gown or in the ihram of another Sahabi. And that Sahabi fell down. And he broke his nose. And now when he broke his nose, he went to Sayyidina Umar and said that this has happened to me. That the king stepped on my gown, fell down and broke my nose and I was bleeding. Now Sayyidina Umar, he called the king and they had a court session, an Islamic court session. And he said to the king that this is what's going to happen. You're going to have to pay some compensation to him or you face the courts. Now the king, he had so much pride in himself that he said to Sayyidina Umar, "Oh Umar, I'm going to leave Islam now, I'm going to join back to Christianity. Because I will not bow down to anybody else. I will not bring myself to a lower station." And Sayyidina Umar, imagine if a king had accepted Islam during this time. If a king had accepted Islam, it would have been a huge thing. Islam would have progressed even further. But Sayyidina Umar, he was so just. He stayed true to Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, regardless of what happens. And he said to the king, now that you've left Islam, after joining Islam, if you leave Islam, there's another ruling for that now. You become a murtad, you become an apostate. And in an Islamic country, if you leave Islam after accepting Islam, it is wajib al-qatl. We must kill you, according to the courts. Now the person said, give me a night to think about my decision. So the king, he went to his quarters, and during the night he packed his bags and he left. He went back to his home and he accepted Christianity again. But if we learn from this story one thing, that Sayyidina Umar, he never compromised his morals for anybody. He didn't compromise anything. He stayed firm upon Islam, he stayed firm upon Quran, he stayed firm upon Sunnah. Islam says this and this was going to happen, regardless of who you are. Everybody in my courts is equal. Whether you're the king of so-and-so nation, or whether you are the beggar on the street, you're all equal in my courts. This was Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Even the beggars could say something to him, and even the kings could say something to him. And they all get the same ruling. There was a time where so the mahr, we have the mahr when you have nikah, when you have a marriage, there's a mahr that you give, a dowry. And this dowry, there was no limit to it. So what would happen is some ladies, they would accept a marriage proposal and they have a huge dowry. And so the Sahaba Kiram and the other companions, they asked, oh Umar, it's getting ridiculous now. The mahr that we're getting is very, very huge. Now can you put something upon this that will bring it lower? So he set a limit on the dowry. He said the dowry cannot exceed this limit. And one day he was delivering the khutbah for Jum'ah. In the middle of this khutbah, a lady shouted from outside the masjid, "Oh Umar, how dare you do something against Allah and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never set a limit for the mahr. So how dare you do this?" Instantly, on the spot, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he sought forgiveness. And he removed this legislation. He said, remove this. And there's no more limit now. That limit was there briefly, and even a lady said to him, an old lady said to him that you remove the limit. And then he removed the limit. This is how just is. You know, if I was to go to tendership today and say to Mr. Johnson that I want this to happen in the country, nothing will happen. If I write a letter to him, nothing will happen. If I text him, I don't have his number, but if I was to do so, nothing will happen. I have no power in front of his eyes, for example. But every single individual who lived in the Islamic Empire in the time of Sayyidina Umar, they all had a voice. Anybody who had a voice, they could voice their concern to Sayyidina Umar. They could say, this is my problem. This is my problem. I want this to be solved. Every single person would have their problem solved by Sayyidina Umar. This was his justice. This was the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability or grant us a leader like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And may also allow us to act upon Islam and stay firm upon the Quran and Sunnah like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. وَمَا عَلِمْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. جزاك الله خير for listening.